No one would give a home to the Apache woman until the cowboy said, "I have two, now we are six." The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the dusty hills when the Apache woman walked into the town. Her footsteps were quiet but steady on the uneven wooden planks of the streets. She carried a small worn bag slung over her shoulder, the leather cracked and soft from years of use. It was clear she had traveled far. Her face, framed by dark hair, showed both strength and a quiet sadness, the kind that comes from walking alone through a world that does not always welcome you. The wind blew gently across the open fields and through the town streets, carrying the faint smell of horses and dust, and yet it could not lift the heaviness in her heart. From the moment she entered the town, the feeling of being an outsider surrounded her like a shadow. People glanced at her as she passed, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. She was dressed simply, in clothes that were practical for traveling but different from what the townsfolk were used to seeing. Her presence, though quiet and unassuming, caused a stir. A few children pointed and whispered to each other, their parents quickly shushing them. Shops that might have offered help closed their doors, and windows were drawn tightly, as if her very presence could bring trouble. Despite the cold reception, the woman did not falter. She had been alone for weeks, walking from one town to another, hoping to find even a small kindness, a place to rest, a meal to eat. Each day had been a struggle. She had slept under trees by the side of the river and once even in an abandoned barn where the floorboards creaked under her weight. Hunger and thirst had become familiar companions, but she carried on, determined to find a place where she could finally feel safe. Her hands, calloused from travel and work, gripped the strap of her bag as she walked with a quiet dignity that no one could take from her. The town itself was small and old, with wooden buildings lining the single main street. A few wagons were parked haphazardly along the side, and horses were tied to posts outside the shops. The air smelled faintly of baked bread and fresh hay, but it also carried an undercurrent of tension, as though the town itself could sense her difference. She stopped in the middle of the street for a moment, letting her eyes wander over the small storefronts. Some of them displayed fruits and vegetables, others tools or cloth, but no one approached her. No one smiled. No one offered her the help she silently prayed for. As she walked, she remembered the stories her grandmother had told her long ago. Stories of courage and kindness, of people helping each other even in the darkest times. Those stories gave her strength now. She reminded herself that patience and politeness were her greatest tools, and that showing anger or frustration would not open doors for her. Instead, she carried herself with grace, bowing her head slightly in greeting to anyone who looked her way, though most did not return the gesture. Her stomach growled as noon approached, reminding her that she had eaten nothing since the previous day. She passed a small diner on the corner, its windows steamed with the warmth of cooking inside. The smell of food reached her nose. Fresh bread, roasted meat, and sweet pies, and for a moment her mouth watered and her heart ached with longing. She stepped closer to the door, hoping to catch the attention of someone inside. She tapped gently on the window with her finger, and a young waitress looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" the girl asked, her voice cautious. I am hungry," the Apache woman said softly, her voice steady but humble. "Could you spare a small meal?" The waitress hesitated. She looked over her shoulder as if checking with someone else. Then, after a brief pause, she shook her head. "I'm sorry," she said. "We don't serve people like you." The words landed like a heavy stone in her chest. She nodded, keeping her expression calm, and thanked the girl quietly before moving on. She had faced rejection before, but each refusal cut a little deeper. Still, she did not give up. She reminded herself that somewhere in this town there might be someone willing to see her as more than her heritage, more than a stranger. She wandered down the street, glancing at each house and shop, her eyes searching for any sign of kindness. In front of one small home, she noticed a family working in their yard, children playing nearby. She took a deep breath and approached, hoping to ask for shelter just for the night. "Excuse me," she said, her voice polite and calm. "Could you please help me?" "I have nowhere to stay." The woman in the yard looked up and quickly shook her head. "I'm sorry, we can't help you," she said, a polite but firm barrier in her tone. The children looked at her curiously, and she gave them a small, gentle smile before stepping back. The Apache woman's heart ached, but she refused to let despair take hold. She moved along, walking to the edge of town where the streets ended and the open fields began. She sat for a moment on a fallen log, letting the sun warm her back, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. Each town she had visited seemed unwilling to accept her. Each person she had met seemed afraid of her simply because she was different. But she carried hope like a quiet flame inside her chest. That hope told her that somewhere, someone would recognize her worth and extend a hand. As the day wore on, the streets began to empty. People closed their shops and went to their homes. The Apache woman continued walking, determined not to give up. She passed the small church on the corner, its doors closed and silent, and the little schoolhouse where the children had just finished their day. Everywhere she looked, she saw signs of life, but none were open to her. The sun began to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the streets, and she felt the chill of the approaching evening. Despite the loneliness, there was a quiet beauty in the town at sunset. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and the wind carried the soft scent of wildflowers from the fields beyond. She breathed deeply, letting the calm of the evening soothe her spirit. She reminded herself that she was not defeated. Each step, each attempt at kindness was part of her journey. She had survived this long alone, and she would continue to survive until someone finally saw her heart. As darkness fell, she found a small spot behind a stack of hay near the edge of town. It would not be comfortable, but it would offer some protection from the cold night air. She unpacked a small blanket from her bag and wrapped herself in it, sitting quietly as the stars began to appear one by one in the sky above. The sounds of the town faded, leaving only the distant calls of owls and the rustle of leaves in the wind. She closed her eyes for a moment and allowed herself a deep sigh, a mix of fatigue and quiet hope. Though she was alone and the world seemed unwelcoming, she held on to the belief that tomorrow might bring a different kind of day. Someone somewhere might show the kindness she had been searching for. The journey had been long, and the nights had been hard, but she was not defeated. She had her dignity, her patience, and her heart, and those were more powerful than the rejection she had faced. As she drifted into a light, restless sleep under the stars, the Apache woman dreamed of a place where she could belong, where she could be safe and welcomed. She dreamed of a small home filled with warmth, laughter, and acceptance, and deep down she believed that one day she would find it. The morning air was crisp, and the Apache woman awoke to the soft sounds of the town stirring. The sunlight painted the wooden buildings a warm golden color, but the warmth of the sun did little to chase away the chill in her heart. She packed her small blanket and bag, straightened her worn clothes, and stepped onto the main street, hoping that today might be different from yesterday. She carried herself with the same quiet dignity she had the day before, but a small ache of loneliness tugged at her soul. Her stomach reminded her sharply that she had not eaten. The town's diner was open, and she approached the door slowly, the smell of fresh bread and sizzling food pulling her forward. She tapped lightly on the glass, hoping to catch someone's attention. A man behind the counter looked up, his eyebrows raised in surprise at seeing her. "Good morning," she said softly, bowing her head slightly in respect. "Could you please give me a small breakfast? I have nowhere to go." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice curt. "We don't serve people like you here." The word stung her, but she nodded politely, forcing herself not to show disappointment. She stepped back from the door, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Each refusal she faced in this town seemed to carry the same message as the others. She was different, and difference was not welcome. The Apache woman's chest tightened with a mixture of sadness and quiet frustration, but she reminded herself to remain calm. Patience had always been her companion, and she could not afford to let anger guide her. She wandered down the street, her eyes scanning every door, every window, every porch. Some townspeople paused briefly to watch her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to caution. She smiled gently at the children who stared at her, though many of the parents quickly pulled their kids away. She understood their fear. It was born from ignorance, but it did not make the sting of rejection any easier to bear. At the edge of town, she found a small fountain surrounded by benches. She sat down, resting her bag beside her and closing her eyes for a moment. The sound of water flowing was soothing, and for a brief moment she felt a sense of calm. She thought about her journey, the miles she had walked, and the town she had passed through. Each town had been different, yet the outcome was often the same. Some people had been kind in words but not in action, while others had avoided her entirely. Still, she clung to hope, believing that somewhere ahead there was a place that would welcome her. After a few minutes, she stood and continued walking, determined not to give up. She passed a small house with laundry hanging on a line in the yard. The woman who owned the home was tending to her garden, her hands busy with soil and plants. The Apache woman approached slowly, her voice calm and respectful. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Could you please help me? I have nowhere to stay." The woman looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. She studied the stranger for a long moment, her expression cautious. "I'm sorry," she said finally, shaking her head. "I cannot help you." The Apache woman nodded and smiled gently. "Thank you anyway," she said, her voice carrying warmth despite the rejection. She moved on, feeling the ache in her chest deepen. It was not the first refusal she had faced, and it would not be the last, but it never got easier. She had hoped that showing respect and humility would open hearts, yet the doors remained closed. She walked to the town square, hoping that perhaps the public area would offer some opportunity. Children played with simple toys, and merchants prepared their stalls for the day. She approached a small market stand, where fruits and vegetables were neatly arranged. "Good morning," she said politely. "Could you spare a little food?" "I have nowhere to go today." The merchant's eyes flicked over her, and he hesitated. I can't," he said quickly, glancing around as if afraid someone might see him helping her. "I'm sorry." The Apache woman's heart sank. She forced a small, gracious smile, nodding politely. "Thank you for your time," she said, stepping away. Each refusal felt like a stone added to the weight she carried, but she did not let herself collapse under it. She reminded herself that patience and perseverance were her strongest allies. As the day wore on, she found herself near the outskirts of town, where the open fields met the forest. She paused to rest, leaning against a wooden fence, and watched the clouds drift slowly across the sky. The breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and grass, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe deeply and feel a quiet peace. The beauty of the world reminded her that, despite the harshness she faced, there was still goodness in life. Suddenly, she heard voices behind her. A group of townspeople were walking along the path, whispering and pointing at her. She could hear their words, though not all were clear. Some were curious, some cautious, and some carried the unmistakable weight of judgment. She turned her head slightly, but did not react with anger or fear. She had learned that showing dignity in the face of prejudice often spoke louder than words. One older man approached her cautiously. "You don't belong here," he said bluntly. "Why do you keep coming back?" The Apache woman looked at him calmly, her dark eyes steady. "I am looking for a place to stay, a small kindness," she said simply. "I mean no harm. I only wish for shelter and food so I can continue my journey." The man frowned and shook his head. "People like you, we don't usually welcome." She nodded politely, her voice steady but warm. "I understand. But I hope someday someone might see me as more than my heritage. I hope that someday someone will open their heart." The man stared at her for a moment, as if weighing her words. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The Apache woman exhaled slowly, feeling a mixture of sadness and quiet pride. She had spoken the truth of her heart, even when others refused to listen. As the afternoon passed, she tried another approach. She walked along the main street, looking for someone who might be willing to offer guidance or help. She approached a small church, hoping perhaps the pastor or a parishioner might show kindness. She knocked lightly on the door, and when no one answered immediately, she waited patiently. Finally, an elderly woman opened the door. "Can I help you, dear?" the woman asked kindly. I have nowhere to stay. Could you please help me? The elderly woman hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. I'm sorry, dear. I can't take you in. We have rules. And people in town. They wouldn't understand. The Apache woman nodded, her eyes kind and understanding. I understand, she said gently. Thank you for your time. She walked away from the church, the words echoing in her mind. They wouldn't understand. Yes, she had encountered misunderstanding everywhere she went, but she refused to let it define her. She reminded herself that kindness was not measured by the number of people who offered it, but by the strength it took to continue searching for it. By evening, the town streets had grown quiet. Shops were closing, and families were returning to their homes. The Apache woman found a small, sheltered spot behind a wooden fence near the edge of town. She unpacked her blanket, wrapped herself carefully, and sat down. The sky above was painted with colors of the setting sun, orange, pink, and soft purple blending together in a peaceful display. She took a deep breath, letting the calm of the evening soothe her spirit. Though she was alone and the world seemed unwelcoming, she refused to give up hope.
Somewhere, someone would see her as a person, not just as a stranger or an outsider.
Somewhere, someone would open their heart and offer her the warmth and safety she so desperately sought. Until then, she would continue walking, continue hoping, and continue showing the quiet dignity that had carried her this far. As night fell, she sat quietly under the stars, listening to the sounds of the town fading into stillness. The breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of another day. She closed her eyes for a moment and allowed herself a deep sigh, a mixture of fatigue, longing, and quiet hope. Though the path ahead was uncertain, she knew she had the strength to continue. The Apache woman believed that one day her perseverance would lead her to a place where she could finally belong. And so, with the stars shining above and the soft sounds of the night around her, she remained patient, determined, and hopeful. She was alone, yes, but she was strong. She had traveled far, faced rejection, and yet she had not lost her heart. Somewhere, in the days ahead, someone would finally see her for who she truly was. And when that day came, her journey would change forever. The morning sun rose slowly over the town, casting a soft golden light over the dusty streets and wooden buildings. The Apache woman woke once again, her blanket folded neatly around her small bag. She had slept lightly, as she always did, listening to the quiet sounds of the town waking up. Though yesterday and the day before had brought only rejection and cold shoulders, she felt a small spark of hope deep inside her. She reminded herself that persistence and patience were her companions, and she refused to let despair take hold. She set off down the main street, her steps steady and purposeful. She had walked these streets for days, and though the looks and whispers of the townspeople still followed her, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She passed shops opening for the day, children skipping to school, and men and women heading to work. Each time someone glanced at her with suspicion or avoided her gaze entirely, she offered a gentle smile or a polite nod. It was her way of saying, without words, that she meant no harm, that she was simply seeking kindness. As she walked toward the outskirts of the town, she noticed movement ahead. A man on horseback was riding slowly along the dirt road. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore the weathered hat and coat of someone who spent long days outdoors. The horse's hooves clicked against the hard ground, and the man's gaze scanned the street with quiet confidence. The Apache woman stopped for a moment, unsure of how this stranger might respond to her presence. In the past, people had turned away, and she had learned to expect caution or even suspicion. But the cowboy was different. He slowed his horse as he drew closer, his eyes meeting hers with a calm, steady gaze. There was no fear, no judgment, only curiosity and a hint of kindness. The Apache woman straightened her back, folding her hands over her bag, and spoke softly. "Good morning," she said, her voice gentle. I have nowhere to go. Could you help me, even a little? The cowboy dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. He studied her for a moment, noticing the weariness in her eyes, the way her clothes had been patched and worn from travel, and the quiet dignity she carried, despite it all. He saw something in her that the townspeople had not: courage, patience, and a heart that had not given up even when the world had turned away. "Where are you from?" he asked finally, his voice low but kind. "I have traveled far," she said, keeping her eyes steady. "I am from the lands of my people, the Apache. I have walked many miles, seeking a place to rest and to be safe. But so far, no one has offered help." The cowboy nodded slowly, understanding more than she realized. "You've had a hard journey," he said. "It's not easy being alone in a world that doesn't always see your worth." The Apache woman's lips curved into a small, grateful smile. "It is true," she said. "But I continue walking because I must believe that somewhere, someone will offer kindness, that someone will see me as more than my appearance or my heritage." The cowboy studied her for a moment, then spoke with a quiet certainty that made her heart lift. "I think I can help," he said simply. "I have a home, a small family, but there is room for you." "You are welcome," the woman blinked, startled by his words. For days she had faced rejection at every turn. No one had spoken such kindness or offered her a place in their home. Her eyes filled with quiet tears, but she blinked them away quickly. She had learned to hold her emotions carefully, to protect herself from disappointment. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know how to repay you." The cowboy shook his head, smiling gently. "No need for repayment," he said. "Kindness is not measured in coins or favors. You come with a good heart, and that is enough." The cowboy showed her to a small room that had been prepared for her. A bed was neatly made, with a clean blanket and a pillow. "This will be your room," he said. "You can stay here as long as you need. Make it your own!" The Apache woman looked around the room, feeling a mixture of gratitude and wonder. She had walked through cold nights and faced rejection at every turn, and now she had a place to rest, a safe haven where she could finally be herself. Tears filled her eyes again, and this time she did not try to hide them. She felt a sense of relief and belonging she had longed for, a feeling that perhaps her journey had finally led her to a home. As the afternoon passed, she helped prepare a simple meal with the cowboy and his children. They worked together, chopping vegetables, stirring stew, and setting the table. Laughter and conversation filled the small home, and the Apache woman found herself smiling more freely than she had in weeks. She shared stories of her travels, of the lands she had seen, and of her people. The children listened with wide eyes, fascinated by the tales, and even the cowboy seemed touched by her words. For the first time, she felt that she was not just tolerated, but truly welcomed. She felt her heart lighten with each kind word, each smile, each small act of generosity. She realized that the world could indeed be kind, that people could see her worth, and that a single act of compassion could change everything. As evening fell, the family gathered around the table for dinner. The Apache woman sat among them, her hands folded in front of her, feeling the warmth of the home and the genuine care of the people around her. The cowboy looked at her with a reassuring smile. "You belong here," he said simply. "We are stronger together." She nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me, for giving me a place to stay, and for welcoming me into your family." The cowboy's words from earlier echoed in her mind. "I have 2, now we are 6. They were more than just numbers. They were a promise of love, acceptance, and belonging. She realized that her journey, long and difficult as it had been, had led her to this moment. A place where she could rest, heal, and finally be part of something bigger than herself. That night, as she lay in her new room, the Apache woman felt a deep sense of peace. The hardships of the past days did not vanish, but they were softened by the kindness she had found. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the home and the quiet strength of the people who had accepted her. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that she had found a place where she truly belonged. And so, the Apache woman began a new chapter of her life, one filled with hope, kindness, and the knowledge that even in a world that often turned away, there were people willing to see her heart and welcome her with open arms. The morning light filtered gently through the small curtains of her new room, and the Apache woman awoke to the sound of birds singing outside. For the first time in many days, she felt safe, warm, and at peace. She stretched her arms, feeling the comfort of a proper bed beneath her, and allowed herself a quiet smile. Life had been hard, but she had finally found a place where she could rest, a place where she was welcomed and valued. The cowboy's home was modest but full of warmth. The wooden floors creaked slightly as the Apache woman walked down the hallway to the kitchen, where the cowboy and his children were already preparing breakfast. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, mingling with the scent of coffee brewing and eggs frying. She paused for a moment, simply observing, and then stepped forward to help. "Good morning," she said softly. "May I help?" The cowboy looked up and smiled.
"Of course," he replied. "We could use an extra pair of hands." The children giggled, delighted to see her joining in.
She moved naturally, chopping vegetables, stirring a pot of porridge, and setting the table with careful attention. Though she had grown accustomed to doing much of her work alone during her travels, she found a new joy in working alongside others, sharing tasks and stories as they went about their morning routine. As breakfast was served, the family gathered around the table. The Apache woman felt a warmth spread through her chest as they laughed and spoke freely, the sound so different from the cold, quiet streets she had wandered for days. She shared a small story from her past, about a river she had once crossed and the lessons she had learned from traveling alone. The children listened with wide eyes, and even the cowboy seemed quietly moved by her words. After breakfast, the Apache woman stepped outside to help with the garden. The cowboy had a small plot of land behind the house where he grew vegetables and herbs. The children joined her, learning how to water the plants, pull weeds, and tend to the soil. As they worked together, the Apache woman shared knowledge passed down from her people, ways to care for plants, how to notice when they needed attention, and the importance of patience in nurturing growth. The cowboy watched from the porch, feeling a quiet admiration for her. She had endured so much, yet her spirit remained gentle, patient, and kind. The children were captivated not only by her stories but also by the way she treated them, with respect, care, and encouragement. He realized that her presence was changing his household in subtle but profound ways. The air seemed lighter, the home warmer, and the bonds between them stronger. As the days passed, the Apache woman settled into a rhythm with the family. She helped with meals, tended the garden, and shared stories in the evenings by the fireplace. She taught the children simple lessons about respect, courage, and understanding, and in return they taught her about the small joys of laughter, games, and the comfort of routine. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, she felt a sense of belonging. She was no longer a stranger, no longer an outsider wandering the streets. She was part of something larger, a family that valued her presence and her heart. The cowboy often worked outside on repairs, fixing fences or tending to the horses, and the Apache woman would accompany him, learning about his work and lending a helping hand when she could. They shared quiet conversations as they worked, speaking of life, values, and the importance of kindness in a world that was often harsh. He told her stories of his childhood, of growing up in the countryside, and of the lessons he had learned from his own parents. She listened with interest, offering her own perspective, and slowly, a deep trust formed between them. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip low in the sky, the Apache woman spoke softly.
"I never imagined I could feel at home again," she said. "For so long I wandered, carrying only my hope and my patience. But now, here with you and your family, I feel a sense of peace I thought I might never find."
The cowboy nodded, his eyes gentle. "You've always had that strength inside you," he said.
"It just needed a place to rest, a family to embrace it. We are glad you are here."
As the days turned into weeks, the town began to notice the change. The children walked to school holding her hand, and neighbors saw her helping around the house, tending the garden, or sharing her gentle smile. Slowly, the prejudice and suspicion that had greeted her on her first days in town began to fade. People started to approach her, asking questions, offering small gestures of kindness, and learning to see her as a person rather than an outsider. The Apache woman's presence became a bridge between her heritage and the town, showing that kindness and respect could overcome misunderstanding and fear. She shared small traditions from her people, ways to care for the earth, stories of bravery and wisdom. The cowboy supported her fully, standing beside her when questions arose or when old prejudices appeared. Together, they showed that family was not just about blood, but about love, respect, and acceptance. Evenings in the home were filled with laughter, storytelling, and quiet reflection. The children loved to gather around her, asking her to tell tales of her travels, the animals she had seen, and the lessons she had learned along the way. She taught them to be curious, to ask questions, and to value the world around them. In turn, they taught her the joy of living fully in each moment, the magic of small wonders, and the beauty of connection. The Apache woman also began to find her own voice in the household, sharing ideas and thoughts about the garden, the meals, and the home. She suggested improvements to the fences, ways to rotate crops in the garden, and even simple crafts to make the house feel more welcoming. The cowboy listened attentively, valuing her insight, and the children eagerly joined in her projects. The home became a place of collaboration, where everyone's ideas were respected and celebrated. One chilly evening, as a gentle snow began to fall, the family gathered around the fireplace, sipping warm tea and watching the flames dance. The Apache woman looked around the room, seeing smiles, hearing laughter, and feeling the quiet strength of a home built on acceptance. She reflected on her journey, the lonely roads, the cold nights, the rejection, and the moments of despair, and realized how far she had come. Her heart was no longer heavy with worry. It was filled with gratitude and love. She whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not just for finding shelter, but for finding a family that saw her worth and embraced her as she was. The cowboy, noticing her expression, gave a small nod, understanding the depth of her feelings. "You are home now," he said softly. "You are part of us." Days turned into months, and the bond between the Apache woman and the family grew stronger. She became an essential part of the household, her wisdom, patience, and kindness shaping the lives of those around her. The children flourished under her guidance, learning not just practical skills, but the values of empathy, courage, and respect. The cowboy, too, found his life enriched by her presence, grateful for the love and care she brought to their home. Through their shared life, the Apache woman discovered that belonging was not simply a matter of having a roof over her head. It was about acceptance, trust, and love, the kind that comes from giving and receiving freely. She had finally found a place where her heart could rest, where her presence was valued, and where she could grow alongside others. Her journey, which had begun with loneliness and rejection, had led her to a home filled with warmth, hope, and a family that cherished her. And so each day became a new chapter of connection and joy. The family worked together, laughed together, and supported each other. The Apache woman's gentle presence and resilient spirit transformed not only her own life, but the lives of those around her. She had found more than a home. She had found acceptance, friendship, and a place where she truly belonged. In the quiet moments of each day, she would look out across the fields, thinking of the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the towns that had turned her away, the nights of cold and hunger, and the moments of doubt. And yet she also remembered the kindness of the cowboy, the smiles of the children, and the warmth of a home that now welcomed her without question. She understood that patience, courage, and a heart willing to keep hoping had led her to this place of belonging. And so, the Apache woman's life began anew, filled with love, acceptance, and the joy of a family that had chosen to open their hearts to her. She was no longer alone. She was part of something greater. A home built not just of wood and stone, but of trust, respect, and unwavering kindness. The mornings at the cowboy's home had grown bright with laughter and life. The Apache woman awoke each day to the sounds of children playing, the smell of fresh bread baking, and the quiet warmth of a home where she was welcomed. For the first time in her life, she did not wake with worry or fear. She felt safe. She felt loved. She belonged. Every corner of the home held the evidence of her presence. The small hand-woven mats she had placed near the fireplace, the fresh herbs she tended in the garden, and the laughter that had become a constant companion. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The townspeople, who once glanced at her with suspicion or ignored her completely, began to notice her presence in a different light. They saw her helping the children, working alongside the cowboy in the garden, and sharing her gentle smile with neighbors. Slowly, curiosity gave way to admiration. People began to ask her questions, learning about her life, her culture, and her stories. They began to realize that she was kind, hardworking, and generous, and that she had nothing but good intentions. The Apache woman never sought attention. She did not boast or demand recognition. She simply lived each day with care, patience, and a quiet courage. And in doing so, she changed the hearts of those around her. The children at school, who had once whispered rumors about her heritage, now spoke proudly of their friend and mentor. Neighbors who had avoided her now offered greetings, small gifts of food, or invitations to share in local celebrations. Prejudice, once heavy and unyielding, slowly melted in the warmth of her presence. The cowboy watched these changes with a quiet satisfaction. He had known from the first moment he met her that she carried a strength few could see. Yet even he was amazed at how her gentle actions, small gestures, and unwavering patience had begun to influence the entire town. He saw the way people approached her with respect, how the children in town looked up to her, and how neighbors began to offer friendship and kindness where once there had been doubt. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the hills, the Apache woman sat with the cowboy on the porch. They watched the children play in the yard, their laughter ringing through the air. She picked up a small flower from the garden and twirled it between her fingers, her thoughts drifting to her journey and the people who had once turned her away. "I never imagined this," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of wonder and gratitude. "I walked for so long, facing rejection and loneliness, and now I feel at home. I feel part of a family. I feel part of a community. I never thought this would be possible." The cowboy smiled, placing a hand gently on hers. "You earned this," he said. "Your courage, patience, and kindness brought you here. But more than that, you showed everyone around you that being different does not mean being unwelcome. You taught us all something important." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I only hoped someone would see my heart," she said. "And now you did. You all did." The children ran to them, holding flowers and small handmade gifts. Their eyes shone with excitement and pride, and they laughed as they presented their tokens to the Apache woman. She accepted each one with warmth, her heart swelling with love for these children who had become like her own family. She knelt to their level, hugging them gently, and whispered words of encouragement, teaching them not only to care for each other, but also to see the good in others, even when it was not immediately obvious. As winter approached, the family's home became a beacon of warmth in the town. The fireplace crackled with a steady flame, filling the room with a comforting glow. The kitchen was busy with preparations for meals, and the garden, though resting under a light blanket of snow, had been carefully tended and stored to provide food for the colder months. The Apache woman had adapted to the rhythm of family life, yet she still carried with her the wisdom and traditions of her people. She taught the children how to preserve food, the importance of caring for animals, and the value of listening to the earth. The townspeople began to visit more often, seeking advice, guidance, or simply the warmth of her presence. She welcomed them with open arms, sharing stories, laughter, and small acts of kindness. Where once there had been mistrust and suspicion, now there was connection and understanding. Her influence spread quietly but powerfully, reshaping the town's sense of community. One evening, the cowboy gathered the family together for a small celebration. He wanted to mark the passage of time and the growth they had experienced together. Candles were lit, the table set with a hearty meal, and everyone gathered to share food and stories. The Apache woman looked around at the smiling faces, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She thought about the long, lonely road she had traveled, the nights spent under the stars, and the rejection she had faced. And she realized that each step of her journey had led her here, to a place of love, acceptance, and family. During the meal, the cowboy raised his glass and looked at the Apache woman. "We have been through many days together," he said, "and I want everyone to know how grateful we are for your presence in our lives. You have taught us patience, courage, and kindness. You are part of this family, and you always will be." The Apache woman felt tears spill over, but she smiled, holding back her emotions with gentle strength. "Thank you," she whispered,
"For welcoming me, for seeing me, and for giving me a home. I could never have imagined this, but I am grateful every day." The children chimed in, sharing their own words of thanks and love.
They spoke of the lessons they had learned, the fun they had shared, and the joy they felt in her presence. Their words were simple but heartfelt, and the Apache woman felt her heart swell with warmth. For the first time in her life, she felt fully seen, fully accepted, and fully loved. As the night drew on, the family gathered by the fireplace. The children curled up with blankets, the cowboy leaned back in his chair, and the Apache woman sat quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the towns that had turned her away, the loneliness she had endured, and the strength it had taken to continue walking. And she realized that every hardship had led to this moment, a moment of belonging, of acceptance, and of love. She also thought about the future.
With this family, with this home, and with the lessons she had learned, she felt ready to face whatever might come next. She knew that life would have challenges, but she had discovered the power of patience, courage, and kindness.
She had learned that even in a world that could be harsh and unwelcoming, there were people willing to open their hearts. And she had found those people, here, in this home, with this family. In the weeks and months that followed, the Apache woman continued to grow alongside the family. She became a pillar of the household, respected not only by the cowboy and the children, but also by the townspeople who had once doubted her. She helped organize community events, shared knowledge of farming and cooking, and offered guidance to anyone who sought it. Her influence became a quiet but powerful force for good, showing that understanding, patience, and love could bridge even the widest gaps. On a clear spring morning, she stood in the garden, looking out across the fields she had helped tend. The sun warmed her face, and the gentle breeze carried the scents of flowers and fresh earth. The children ran and played nearby, their laughter mingling with the songs of birds. The cowboy worked at the edge of the garden, repairing a fence, and he glanced up at her with a smile that said everything words could not. For the first time in her life, the Apache woman felt truly at peace. She had traveled long and faced rejection, but she had persevered. She had found kindness in the heart of a cowboy and his family. She had found love in the smiles of children and respect in the eyes of the townspeople.
She had found a home, not just a house, but a place where her heart could rest, where her presence mattered, and where she could be fully herself. And as she looked out across the garden, the memories of her journey faded into the past. The loneliness, the cold nights, the rejection. They were all behind her now. She had discovered the truth that had guided her all along. Patience, courage, and a good heart could overcome the darkest roads, and kindness could create a home where one had never existed before.